All right, Elise, I'm going to introduce you and we are going to get going.
Right.
Elise Mitchell is what we call a serial entrepreneur. This woman, like almost everything out of her mouth feels like entrepreneurial genius. She started an agency, Mitchell Communications. She grew it. It was identified over and over as one of the fastest growing businesses. She sold it to Dentsu. She went on to play a role with Dentsu in M&A and helping them grow out their resources. She does a lot of consulting for agencies and other businesses. She's just such a go-to on all topics related to our industry, growing our industry, leadership, and of course, client service. And we are so delighted to be able to share her expertise with you today. This is going to be fast moving, lots of information you can use. So Elise, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much. We're delighted to have you.
Great. Thank you, Kim. I appreciate your leadership so much in the industry. We built our agencies together at the same time. We have so many great memories of being entrepreneurs together. So I appreciate you a lot. And thank you for having me. I love this topic. I think this topic is meaty. It's something that we should all be thinking about. Well, I guess we do. We think about it all the time, right? Is how we be a great advisor to our clients and deliver that kind of experience that we want for them to have, that keeps them coming back, that keeps them our clients forever and ever. How do we do that? It is challenging, but we're going to dig right into that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let's make sure everybody can see it. And as Kim suggested, let me put this on full screen here. Hold on just a minute. Let me get it to slideshow. Hold on just a second. There we go. There we go. Can you see it okay? Everybody see it all right?
Well, we're seeing it, but there we go.
Okay. Can you see it now? Okay, great. Okay. So, okay, mastering the art and science of advising. This is aspirational, right, guys? We're not saying that you have to be able to do this right away. It's a journey. It's something that we are all on the journey of trying to be great advisors to our clients. And how do we do that? Well, let's as Kim said, let's just jump in and talk about it today. First, I always like to start with a question, like thinking about your own situation, thinking about your own agency, and you can feel free to jump in the chat box all throughout this conversation. But I'd love to see what your thoughts are on this. Is if you think about your agency on its very best day, what words would clients use to describe their experience with you? Like when you're at your absolute best, what do they say about you? And of course, these are always our very best days when we could have that kind of impact, and people love, we do. I'm seeing one team able to tackle anything, fantastic, collaborative, two-party, yes, yes, and yes, all of these things, right? Problem solvers, getting it done for them. Trusted advisor, Melissa, thank you. I love that. We're going to talk about trusted advisor in a minute. Agree. These are the things that we want, but let's do a reality check here. What prevents this from happening every day? So what are the obstacles, the things that you experience every day that hold you back or that prevent from that fantastic client service experience from happening? What is it? There's a lot of things, right, that we are juggling and balancing, things that we are struggling with, competing priorities. Every client expects to be treated like they're your only one, right? Or they are your favorite one. Budget, time, that's right. There's so many things that prevent the great experience that we want to have happen. Here are just a few. You all are thinking of these and many others. We get overwhelmed. We don't have the time. We don't have the budget. There's a miscommunication of some kind. Sometimes there's unclear or unrealistic expectations, which we'll talk about a little bit later. These things they're frustrating, aren't they? Because it's not ideal. It's not you at your best. It's not your client at their best, but it's kind of the world that we live in. It's what we have to deal with. Because let's face it, what we do in advising clients, it's complex, it's messy, it's hard to do. We are often being asked to come up with new solutions to nagging problems, or sometimes to brand new problems that arise in a moment. And we have to be a quick thinker, thinking creatively, sometimes in a crunch without a lot of time or budget that we'd like to have. We are very often trying to bring clarity to very confusing situations for our clients or for their target audiences. But you know, here's something I want you to stop and think about. Being a good advisor, it's not just about giving good advice. Yes, that's a core part of it. That's not all there is to it. It is also about the experience that our clients have with us. So the hallmark of every successful agency, I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm telling all of us something we already know. It is this unwavering commitment to exceptional client service, right? This is the aspiration that we all have, but heck, it is hard. It is challenging. Figuring out what that great client service experience looks like and then actually delivering on it is a constant challenge because of all of these obstacles and so many of the things that we can't foresee. And of course, clients themselves. Like I remember, Kim, you and I probably laugh about this before. I would just tell myself, if these clients would just go away, I could just get real work done. And I think there isn't anything that makes any sense in that statement, right? But it was the frustration of dealing with people. Clients, they're unpredictable. They're hard to read. They're motivated by things that seem maybe unusual to me, like different hopes or fears, things I don't always understand. They're quirks. They have bosses too, which we, of course, often forget that. And you know what? They're just people, and people are messy and they're complex and they're hard to read, and people change, right? A client might show up at the beginning of engagement in a certain way, and then it seems like they become a different person over time. We'll talk about that. What is it that causes people to feel under threat and under pressure and change? So what is the solution? That's what we're here to talk about today. And we're just going to scratch the surface, but I think we've got some good practical ideas of some things we can try. But first, I want you to think about the science part. So the art and the science part's the neuroscience, the behavioral science, which we'll get into here in just a second, is what clients want, figuring out what clients really want, what's going on with them, what they're thinking, what's in their mind. That's the science part. Then the art is the art of client service, which we'll talk about on the second half of this. And here's the catch. How do we do this for each client efficiently, effectively, and consistently, right? This is the holy grail. How do we make it more of the way in which our agency and our team operates so that we're not one-offing all the time? Yes, we customize for clients depending on their needs, but we'd like to be able to do it in an efficient and consistent manner so we become known for this. So, okay, what does our agenda look like? Two parts. First, for the first couple of minutes, we're going to get into the neuroscience, the behavioral science, and I'm going to teach you how to be a people reader. Because you know what? You know more than you think you do, but I'm going to teach you how to look for some clues of what is going on with the other person. We're going to talk a little bit about what to know before or as soon as possible after an engagement begins. And we're going to talk a little bit about triggers. Talk about triggers. Then the second part is figuring out what's important to your client. We're going to talk about timeless truths of things that we know about clients and what that means for us as trying to become trusted advisors to them. We'll talk about how to build trust-based relationships, how to move client engagements forward faster. And then I got a bonus for you. So Kim and Andy and I talked about this last week when we looked at the registrations. And I know you register, it says, what are you hoping to get out of this webinar? And they sent me the spreadsheet. I was like, oh my gosh, like every third or fourth person that registered said, can you please help me figure out how to deal with a difficult client situation? I was like, okay, I'm throwing it as a bonus. That could be a whole nother webinar we might have another time, but I've got one scenario for you about how to deal with a difficult situation and what you can do to manage that situation. Plus, and this is in the guide. So if you, as Andy and Kim mentioned, the guide that you can get from that resource tab, I encourage you to get this, download this. If you don't want to now, that's fine, but later be sure, and I think it comes out later, there are a lot of reflection questions to go deeper on any of these topics, some exercises, things you can do with your team on your own time, since we don't really have the time today to go through all of it. But I wanted to give you some of those things to think about. Okay. What do clients want? The question, what do clients want? Like, this is such a question. And if you think about it, you thought you were getting into the field of strategic communications, but you're kind of also in the field of human psychology, right? And behavioral science. You're trying to understand what makes people tick. How do they behave? How do I anticipate what they behave? And I'm going to teach you to see two different types of clues. So one is the very obvious types of clues. And the others are the ones that are maybe not so obvious. So what do I mean by that? Well, the obvious ones, and this the iceberg visual is probably a pretty good parallel for this. The obvious are the things that I can see, right? Which is the words that somebody uses, their tone, their actions, their body language. If they're sitting with their arms crossed or looking away, or they don't look at you in the Zoom camera, or they turn off their camera, eye contact, things that are pretty obvious that kind of help us read the room and read the person on the other side of the client table. But you know what? Then there's all the ones that are not so obvious, the ones that are sort of invisible. We don't always see these things. So how is somebody motivated? What are they afraid of? What is their belief system, their values? What are the biases that they bring to the conversation? Their mindset, which we'll talk about in a minute. What are their past experiences that maybe make them behave in a certain way? And here's the key. You've got to try to see the whole person, not only what is obvious, but what is not so obvious. So how do you do that? So I'm going to teach you that here in just a minute, because to me, this is really where we go from just client service to exceptional client service. When we really begin to know and understand how somebody thinks, how they make decisions, how they like to be communicated with, or what they say, what they don't say, what they want, what they fear. These are things that give us more of a sense of who this person is and what would it be like to work with them in the most effective way possible. So I'm going to give you a couple clues. First place I'm going to go, you may not be expecting, but I love this stuff. So after I sold my agency and was with Dentsu for about 7 years, I knew I wanted to get back on my own at some point in time. What I do now, executive coaching and consulting, I work with a lot of agencies, love it. But I got my training to become a coach through the Neuro Leadership Institute, which is all about brain-based thinking and coaching. And I actually fell in love with this stuff. So my parents were scientists. They were college professors, and I went off in the field of communications, but it's been so much fun to talk with them in these recent years about all I have learned about the brain and about human behavior. Is very scientific, but it's so practical. And I always thought to myself, gosh, if I had known all these things long ago, I am sure I would have been a much better leader, but I know them now and I want to share them with you. I'm just going to give you 4 quick fundamental principles. They're very practical, and you'll see how I kind of weave them throughout our content today about how the brain works. So I'm sure you've seen a cutaway of a brain like this before. I want you to look at the 2 parts labeled on the left. So the prefrontal cortex, this is this part right here, it's behind your forehead. This is in the thinking part of the brain, the conscious part of the brain. This is actually where you do your most complex thinking, such as strategy, decision making. If you have your head down and you're thinking very deeply about a plan for a client or proposing something to them, that you're using your prefrontal cortex. You're going very deep. A lot of times you sort of lose track of time. Why? Because you're really thinking deeply. That's the prefrontal cortex. The other part to know is the limbic system, which is actually kind of in the back of your brain at the top of the spinal cord. It's in the unconscious part of the brain. So, it happens automatically. This is the part, if you've ever heard of an amygdala hijack, the amygdala resides in the limbic system. This is the part of your brain that controls emotion and emotional response and memory. And it's also, interestingly, where your brain's fight, flight, or freeze response resides. Okay, so here's the first principle I want to teach you. These 2 parts of the brain, they do not work well at the same time. Now, why would that be? Well, as it turns out, both of these parts are fuel intensive. So what is brain fuel? Well, there's 3 things you need to feed your body, to feed your brain, so that you operate at your highest ability. So you need water. So you need to be drinking water all day long, plenty of water, stay hydrated, glucose, which is just good nutrition throughout the day. And what is the most underrated brain fuel? Sleep, right? Which I remember years ago saying, oh, I don't need to sleep that much. Well, you can pull a couple of all-nighters here and there, but you probably know when you are tired or you are hangry or you're thirsty, you don't function very well. You cannot think very well, and you certainly cannot manage your emotions very well. You lose your cool much quicker. So here's the first principle to know. If they don't work well at the same time, which would you rather have in charge? Your thinking part of the brain or your emotional, your defensive response to the brain? The key is if they don't work well at the same time, which would you rather have in charge? It is always better to have your prefrontal cortex in charge so you can think your way through any situation. So that's principle number one. Okay, principle number two is threats and rewards, which is, this is interesting, this is your brain's organizing principle. So all day long, from the time you get up in the morning till the time you go to bed at night, your brain is scanning the environment around you, looking for just two things: a threat to move away from and a reward to move toward. So isn't that interesting? And of course, I have a picture of a gigantic jar of M&Ms on the screen because isn't that the ultimate reward? And you might say, well, I don't know, Elise, I'm not that crazy about chocolate, but if you had my favorite running shoes or a great bottle of wine, or if it was a big jar full of money, right? So you kind of get the idea, is that rewards can be very different from one person to another. So this is an important principle for us to remember. You might even write this down. I remember they taught us this in our coaching training. No, it's a timeless truth. No two brains are alike. That sounds like, oh, well, of course I know that. But I get up every day, still married to the same guy for 34 years. And I always think my husband should think like me. And you know what? He doesn't. Why? Because he's his own person. He sees the world a different way. He thinks about things differently. We're different. So we do ourselves and our clients a disservice when we assume that we know what they think and that they think like we do. They don't. Everybody's different. So rewards and threats can be different for everyone. What motivates me might not motivate you. What threatens me might not threaten you. So let's talk about threats. This is our third principle: social threats and physical threats. So I remember when I first heard about this principle, I'll be honest, I didn't believe it. And here's the principle. Our brains and our bodies react the same, sometimes worse, to a social threat as we do to a physical threat. And I thought, how can that be? Is it a physical threat the biggest thing there is? Well, yes, but physical threats can pass. So like if you were walking along a street and you step off a curb and all of a sudden this big bus swings around the corner, it's like almost going to hit you. Your brain goes into defensive mode. You jump back. You didn't even have to think about it, right? You jumped out of harm's way. Oh my gosh, it was a scary moment, but it passed. The physical threat passed. But now think about a social threat. A social threat sometimes is something you carry with you for years. So what is a social threat? Anything that makes you feel bad. Embarrassment, love lost, feeling marginalized, being isolated, which kind of explains in COVID, we had both physical threat and the social threat, making a mistake in front of other people, failure, just anything that makes you, goes into a threat mindset. And we actually have a name for this mindset. So let me get there in a minute. Social threats trigger this defensive response, this threat response, and it makes it very difficult to think clearly. So why would that be? Well, remember which part of the brain is in charge when I am under threat? The limbic system. And when I'm reacting very negatively, my prefrontal cortex goes quiet. Why? Because it's allowing all the brain fuel to go to run the limbic system, which is in overdrive. So this is really important to know, because when we are under threat, even if it is just a social threat, and I say just a social threat, which sometimes can be worse even than a physical threat, my limbic system's in charge, my prefrontal cortex goes quiet, I don't think very clearly, and I'm in what we call the away mindset, which is, oh my goodness, I'm pushing away from this perceived threat. What happens to the brain? Well, because I'm in protect mode, I become very closed-minded. I'm very singularly focused on protecting myself. I become defensive. I might miss things you say to me. I hear them, but I don't retain them, don't remember them. I very often jump to conclusions. Sometimes my inner critic is getting very loud, and I resist. I avoid risk at all costs. Why? Because I'm under threat mode. Okay. This is what we call the away mindset. But there is a beautiful place to be that is just the opposite. And it's called the toward mindset. So this is very interesting. We call it the away and the toward because it sort of makes sense, because I move away from threats, but I move toward rewards, right? So when I am in a toward mindset, all of a sudden, my prefrontal cortex takes charge. I start thinking. Why? Because I'm curious. my interest has been piqued because I perceive a potential reward of some kind. So I move toward a conversation. I move toward an opportunity. I move toward a relationship, right? I'm interested now, and my brain starts making all these connections. All of a sudden, I start to see potential. I start to think more creatively. All of a sudden, I can see solutions where before I didn't. I'm much more willing to take risk now. I'm much more resilient. I'm, bounce back after things going sideways. Why is that? Because I'm in reward mode. I'm moving toward a potential reward, and I'm thinking my way through the situation. This is the best place to be. And it is great if we can get a client in a toward mindset, and also, of course, to get ourselves in a toward mindset. How do you do that? We're going to talk about that here in a couple of minutes, but here's the key I want you to understand. Knowing how the brain works, and everybody's brain works like this, generally speaking, knowing how the brain works helps us better understand what is going on in the mind of a client, which is powerful indeed. And really, remember, you're just looking for clues, right? You're trying to make some educated guesses of what's going on. And in this case, some of these not so obvious clues, such as, oh gosh, my client seems to be in the away mindset. They seem very threatened and upset about this. Wonder what's going on there for them. Why is that so scary for them? Or, wow, they seem very excited. That's a reward. Another not so obvious clue, if your agency has a behavioral assessment of some kind, like DISC or Enneagram or predictive index. I love those because I always sit and think, is this client a D or an I or an S or a C? Maybe I know somebody like them in the past. Yes, I probably know, I could anticipate better of how they might act or behave. What are their tendencies and preferences? What are their triggers? So let's jump into those last two here quickly. So tendencies. So this is actually in your sheet. So this is on the guide. This is on page 1 here. I've got this whole chart for you. And gosh, we could make this list a mile long, couldn't we? Of what are the tendencies or preferences or typical behaviors of a client. These are things it'd be great to know before an engagement begins, or as you're getting to know a client, maybe as soon after an engagement begins as possible. Why? Because these tendencies impact so much of what the client agency engagement looks and feels like. So for example, is your client daring? Are they more bold? Do they take more chances? Or no, they tend to be cautious. Or are they somewhere in between, right? That gives you a sense of how open might they be to some really out there ideas. Another example, skeptical versus accepting. So is the client tend to be, somewhat skeptical, maybe a little cynical, maybe they want to see a lot of data before they're willing to move to the next step. Or they're like pretty open, like, hey, that sounds really interesting. Let's proceed. Let's see where this takes us. So that gives you kind of a sense of how does a person evaluate ideas and how might you need to accommodate to what they're like. So I didn't draw this exercise out for you, but I just want to kind of illustrate it. This is a great exercise to do. We just get a blank piece of paper and you just draw a continuum for each one of the tendencies and any other tendencies that you can think of. And you just plot on a scale of 1 to 10. Where do you think you are on each one of these tendencies? Where is the client? And then here's, of course, the question to ask. What do I do about the gap? Like, what if I am really pretty daring, but my client seems so cautious? How do I think about closing that gap or accommodating more to them to maybe I could bring them a little bit more to the right on the spectrum of those things? What could you do to overcome those differences? That's a good exercise that would be helpful, I think, to think through about a client's tendencies. So now I want to talk about triggers. This is another clue, just a clue. But I want to share this with you. I think this is a powerful model. It's called the SCARF model. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of SCARF. You can Google this. There's a lot of great stuff on SCARF out there. But basically, it's a model of the 5 most common social triggers that everybody, to some degree or another, is triggered by. So this is based on some really interesting neuroscience research by a man named Matthew Lieberman back 10 or 15 years ago when the functional MRI was first out there, and they would put the electrodes on people's brains, on their heads and put them into these functional MRIs. They watched different parts of the brain light up. And Matthew Lieberman, he began to notice these patterns as, people seem to be triggered sort of negatively, so to speak, about certain types of things. And he wrote up his research and became very well known in the neuroscience community. And David Rock, who's the founder of the Neuro Leadership Institute, where I got my coaching training, he created this model that makes it pretty memorable for us. It's called SCARF. So here's what we're going to do. Kim, I'm going to ask for your help in a second to read this slide. And as you're listening to Kim read about these 5 common social triggers, sort of ask yourself, hey, like, what triggers me? What's important to me? What's important to my client? So Kim, do you mind read this for us if you would?
Happy to. So status is a trigger, and that definition is your relative importance to others, desire to be respected, your competitive spirit. Another trigger is certainty. That's defined as your desire for clarity, ability to predict the future and its impact on you. Another trigger is autonomy, desire for independence, sense of control over the events in your life and your ability to influence outcomes. Another trigger is relatedness, how connected and safe you feel with others. And then the F in SCARF is fairness, perception of fair exchange and treatment between people.
Right. Okay. And again, on your handout, I have some questions for you. You could even rank order these 1 through 5, which is a great team exercise to do. Then go around the room. Hey, what are your top 2 triggers? Are you an autonomy person? You like that independence? You want choice? What triggers your client? This is really what I want you to think about. Hey, I kind of know what triggers me, but what is it that really triggers my client? Does this person, are they a certainty person? Like they don't like surprises. They like to know as much as possible. So I need to keep them informed, in the loop, so that they don't sort of freak out because they can't see what's coming. So this is a wonderful exercise to do. It just is great to know about human nature, about people and what they're like. Because again, remember, you're just looking for clues. Things that are useful to know about yourself, of course, but about your clients as you get to know them, about your colleagues as you're working with them on a team. Because the key is, the better you know what makes someone tick, the better chance you have of working effectively with them. Okay, so I've given you a bunch of clues. Let's move to part 2, which is what you can deliver. And this is the art part, right? In fact, I've got 2 books here I'm going to recommend. I love great books. I've got both of these books right here. I highly recommend both of these books. If you have an agency book club or something, bring these forward. Say, hey, these books were recommended. Let's pick one. I will tell you, The Trusted Advisor, I read this book when I was first building my agency, and it absolutely was a paradigm shift for me to think about, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to just build a agency of a bunch of order takers and doing tactical work. Like, I want to operate at the top of our capacity. How do we get involved in strategy? How do we get our clients to take our advice? How do we become a trusted advisor, which is a very aspirational thing to be. We'll talk about that in a minute. I love this book. And yes, Noreen, I see your note. Love The Art of Client Service. This is a wonderful book. It was written by Robert Solomon. It's about the advertising and marketing agency industry, but every single tip and strategy he gives you is applicable to our types of firms. I love it. There's so much great practical advice, both really, really good books. And they got me thinking as I was sort of working on this content about a year or so ago when I was first developing it. I thought, I want to be a trusted advisor. You want to be a trusted advisor, but it kind of depends on the client, right? It's what they're like and how hard they are to work with. Yes and no, because while clients are unique and different people, there's some things we know about them that are timeless truths. So Kim, I'm going to want your help to read this slide. This is a great slide. I wish we had more time. We go deeper on it. But as Kim is reading this, I want you to think to yourself, is this true about my client? And if so, what does that mean for me and how I need to show up? So Kim, go ahead, read for us about this slide.
Elise, I just want to mention, someone asked on the scarf slide if that was applicable to other relationships as
Oh,
well.
totally.
And I think all of this is, right?
Oh yeah, I
It's
always
a
say,
bonus,
yes,
guys.
take it home, ask for your significant other, your family members, like, what are you triggered by? Yeah, to all of it's applicable in your personal life. Yeah.
Okay, let me jump in. So clients may not know what they want or need. I mean, I've never encountered that before, right? But as a trusted advisor, you help them see what's possible. Clients like options. As a trusted advisor, you give them choices, but not too many, only the best choices, right? Clients want to be smart. So as a trusted advisor, you can help them discover their own insights. Clients want you to be easy to do business with. As the trusted advisor, you have to figure out what works best for them. Clients want to be heard. As the trusted advisor, you have the opportunity to listen for what is and isn't said. Clients often need help knowing what a win looks like. As a trusted advisor, you can put forward the obvious and not so obvious metrics. Clients want to feel good about their decisions. As a trusted advisor, you can praise their thinking, encourage the try. Clients need to recognize the agency's contributions. And as a trusted advisor, you can credit the efforts and report on the wins.
Yeah. Isn't this great? I mean, each one of these ideas, I wish we could just pull it apart and really talk about it, because there's so much in here, answers I don't necessarily have, but we all can sort of think through together. What is important to my client? What do I need to be doing to align with that? So I'm gonna give you some ideas here before we're done with our time today that kind of come back to this slide in a minute. We'll come back to it. So just kind of let that sink for a minute, because really, to me, what Kim just read just describe the ideal client agency relationship. Like, I would love to be able to do this every time for my clients. And an ideal relationship, what does it look like? Well, you see on the screen here, it looks like, we're meeting their needs. We're making that difference in their business. We're easy to do business with. We take away the hassle and the worry of our clients. They feel good about us. They recognize what the agency is doing to change things for them. They take our counsel. They buy our ideas, at least some of them. They feel served. We feel we have served them. And here's the key. It has to work for both parties. It has to work for the client as well as the agency. And that is the only way that is truly meaningful and enduring, sustainable, and it's frankly very rewarding to be able to deliver this kind of service. So that begs the question. So how do I do this? How do I build this kind of relationship? Well, I'm going to boil it down to just kind of a simple principle. This is in Robert Solomon's book too. Think about it. You want to do great work for the client, but great work, sometimes it takes risks, right? It's a little bit of uncertainty. We don't always know how it's going to turn out. Clients take risks with people they trust, and trust is the foundation of every great relationship. So here's what you need to do. Focus on building trust to build a great relationship, to enable great work to happen, which builds more trust. So think of it like that virtuous cycle, right? I'm building trust in that relationship. I'm creating that relationship with the client where they really trust me, and that enables great work to happen, and which then builds more trust. But here's the thing. How do you build trust? Well, again, we don't have time to go through all of this, but I think it's important to say it happens every day in those interactions that you have with a client, how you're showing up for them, how you're credible, you're reliable, you do what you say you'll do. You're clearly working on their best behalf. You're doing what is right and best for the client to the best of your ability. Every day that happens. But there's also critical moments in client agency relationships. I'm going to go through 3 and give you some practical ideas of what you can do to build greater trust and how to show up as that true trusted advisor in the relationship. So here's strategy number 1, kicking off a new client or a new project or assignment. And I know your agency has an onboarding process, so we're not duplicating that. I'm going to suggest an idea about how you might enhance that and would help you build that trusted relationship. And it's a strategy called lead by questioning. You might have heard of this before. But it's the idea that as leaders and advisors, we often tend to be very directive. We tell people what to do. We feel like we're paid to give advice. Nothing wrong with that. But there are times when it would be good to stop and ask a question. So Why? Why would we stop and ask a question? Well, it demonstrates curiosity, which is a wonderful quality to have in an advisor. Keeps you from making incorrect assumptions that are going to lead to mistakes or oversights or cause bumps in the road on the engagement. Makes a client feel seen and heard, right? We just read about that on the previous slide. Shows your strategic thinking chops, really, that you take the time to clarify the situation, you learn all you can, and then you advise. And frankly, it's going to minimize pushback because it's going to move your engagements forward with less friction because you clarify things up front. So what should you be asking? Well, I'm going to give you 2 sets of questions. I don't want you to sweat trying to write through or think about all the questions. Just pick one question. I'm going to show you questions that you can ask about the assignment when you're kicking off a new project of some kind, and questions to ask about the client. So just find one question that might be useful for you. So here's the first set of questions about an assignment. In addition to all the normal questions that you would ask in onboarding a new project, you might consider asking to the client, what are your top priorities for this project? Key milestones where we want to stop and do check-ins with each other. What are the most important? There's lots of deliverables. What are the most important ones? Pitfalls to avoid? I like this one. Absolutes? Absolutely not. I love this one. Who else should we consider, consult, inform? Because sometimes the client isn't thinking about these other influencers or decision makers in a project. Wouldn't it be nice to know that? So you could build that into your timeline. And then, of course, the magic question you should always ask is, what else? What else am I not thinking about? What else do you want to add? So here's questions to ask now about the client. This is about the person. So you're asking them to the client, hey, how do you prefer that we communicate? How often do you want updates? How much detail do you want? What and when is the best way to meet? Is it Thursday mornings at 8 before you walk into that big board meeting where you just need the most recent information about a project? Whatever it is, it's okay. Tell us so we can make it work for you. What are they excited about? What are they most worried about? And then what would make things easier for you? Would you basically just given the client permission to tell you, hey, it would really help if ... Great. I want to know, how can we make this easier for you? So that's strategy number 1. Okay, strategy number 2, introducing an idea. So many times our agencies say, hey, you need to try taking some of these new ideas to a client. You're like, yeah, but you didn't ask for it. How do I introduce an idea? So here's my thought on this. This comes out of the book, The Trusted Advisor. It's a 5-step framework that David Meister, the author, gives us here. I've modified it a little bit for our purposes, but I love the framework, which is how do we come to the table to have a conversation with the client, but make it a partnership. So it's not necessarily my brilliant idea all the time, although it's nice for them to think you have brilliant ideas. But sometimes, remember, clients want to be smart. How do we help them become a partner with us in developing a new idea? So here are the steps. The first is to engage, right? How you would bring forward a topic of importance. The second step is to listen. So asking the client what they think, seeking to understand their perspective. The third is how we frame it up. Like, gee, I sort of see something that might be worth our time and effort here. Number 4 is envisioning, which is how do you get the client to think about what could be, what that future reality could be look like that is exciting and motivating for them to move toward that reality. And then the 5th is to gain the client's agreement, even if it's just to move to the next step to put together a proposal or something to that effect. So here are some conversation starters, things you can actually say. So what do I say? So I come to the conversation with the client and I say, hey, client, I've been thinking about this. There's some research I've been reading, some trends. It's got me thinking about your business. And I'm sort of curious about this emerging audience over here. Do you think this is a potential audience for us? Then you stop and say, what is your perspective on this? Tell me more. How do you see this? Hear them out. Then if you say, yes, we're seeing some opportunity, you can say, you know what? I see a possible opportunity. Wouldn't it be great if we thought about how we could get that new audience to become a part of your brand? What would that look like? And how would that change the business for you? So you're envisioning that future reality, getting the client a little bit excited about what could be. And then you say, okay, so what would it take for us to just go to the next step? Would, put together some ideas, maybe put together a proposal, at least give you something to consider. and you get the client's agreement to take the next step. So this, again, lots of ways you could do this. This is just a way I thought you could think about how you could introduce that idea. And it's really in partnership that you're doing it with the client. So here's strategy number 3. So this is our bonus. And Kim, after this, we'll stop and we'll see if there's any questions if we have some time left, which is when things go sideways. Oh my goodness, this happens all the time, doesn't it? So the situation I picked was clients make unrealistic demands. They seem agitated. What's happening when that client is showing up that way? Perhaps they've cut the budget or they've moved the deadline up and it's not realistic. What do? First thing I want you to do is you want to take a deep breath. So just take a deep breath, step back in your mind and think. Use your prefrontal cortex. So you want to think in this moment. Don't let your limbic system take over. If you does, you go into threat mode, right? And you can't think, you can't string a sentence together. So you're just going to calm down. You're going to think a minute. I want you to not take it personally because you know what? It might not be you, it might not be the agency. It might not even be the project. There might be something else going on with the client. And this is when you get curious and you start looking for the clues. You say, does this seem to be a trigger that I've noticed about the client or a tendency, or what do I tell about their body language? Or they're saying this, but they're not really saying this. What else could be going on that is the underlying issue that's causing this particular situation? And now here's what you can say. So if you think, what do I do? Take a deep breath. I start thinking. Now, what do I say? So 3 steps you take. The first is acknowledge. And I think this is important, where you just tell the client, I hear you. I can tell this is important. Thank you for sharing it with me. It's important for me to hear this, right? So you acknowledge, you don't judge, you just acknowledge, right? So that kind of helps the client sort of take a deep breath too. And then you say, can you tell me more about what's going on? Tell me more about your thinking, your concerns, what you want to see differently, how you see this could work. What's more or less important here? Are there trade-offs we could make, right? Things are always possible. How do we think together about what that could look like? And you're going to have to ask questions. And then that third step is to offer. Now, here's the key. I do not want you to offer in the moment to say, yes, of course, I can wave that magic wand and fix it, because you might or you might not be able to. So I want you to offer by saying, let me check with my team. Let me come back with some options. We'll think through some possible trade-offs. Let me come back to you on this. And when do you need to know by, right? So if they say end of the day or end of the week, and then you ask them, would this work for you? And what you've done is you just bought yourself a bit of time to be able to go back to the team and go, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And you may or may not be able to do it, but you might be able to offer some compromises. So there's always things that can be done. But in this moment, when things go sideways, there's things you can do and things you can say that will help you in the moment. So if you stop and think about these 3 things we just talked about, it's how you ask good questions, kicking off a new project or a new client, how you introduce a new idea to a client, how you handle a situation that goes sideways. Just think about it. Look at this list. You just checked every box. This is what a trusted advisor does. And I know this is on a perfect day, right? But it's good to keep in your mind. It is doable. It's not impossible. And every once in a while, to do something exceptional is going to get you closer to the mark of being that trusted advisor you want to be. So I know we've covered a lot here. Kim, let's just stop in whatever time we have left to see if there's any questions. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. I think people are digesting. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I think one thing that's so great about this, Elise, is like everybody on the team plays a role in this, right? Like the newest person has the opportunity to observe behaviors that maybe the rest of the team isn't seeing because they're so deeply ingrained in what has been. So creating an opportunity to have these discussions and hear from people and talk it through, while you may not feel like you have time, it can actually save you a lot of time, right?
Yeah. I love that. And if you think about even at the sort of the account manager level or the account supervisor, whatever it is really the front line of the agency, we are often the face to the client. And so we are in a better situation to read the room, to read the client, to say, I've noticed this about this client. This is how they seem to behave when things are not in a certain way, or when things are in a certain way. And how do we leverage that? Or how do we avoid triggering a client in a certain way? I agree. Everybody needs to bring forward observations about a client, their insights, their ideas about how to navigate that client relationship and make it a little bit better. The more senior folks, they're kind of more removed, they're not seeing the day-to-day always. So you can really help the rest of the team by sharing your observations. Even if you're not really sure what it means, say, hey, is this something I've noticed and I want to share it about this particular client?
Awesome. I'm just going to note that we are over time. So folks, we booked 45 minutes on your schedules. If you need to go, no worries. But I think if we'll pick up these couple of questions, if you need to go, you'll have them in the recording. Oh, the questions are growing. Let's see if we can just get through a few, Elise. Okay. This one is so familiar to me because I'm so used to being the consultant and I hate silence, but you do get in a habit of talking a lot, counseling. So what do you recommend to help people learn to pause, ask questions, listen more when it feels super awkward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I remember when in my coaching training, they talked about, and again, I was having to shift my mindset from spending my whole career as an advisor and a strategist to being a coach. They taught me something so incredibly valuable about this very point, which is don't be afraid of silence. Silence is not a bad thing. Sometimes the other person is thinking, they are processing, they're considering, they're evaluating. So just because somebody isn't talking doesn't mean that they're not with you, that they're not in the moment. So sometimes if you notice the pause, you could say something like, hey, tell me what you're thinking. What's coming to your mind? What questions do you have? So you're inviting the other person to engage in the conversation. So it's always good to sort of pause periodically, say, let me stop there and ask you, Kim, what are you thinking? What's coming to your mind? So you're inviting them into the conversation as opposed to feeling like, oh my gosh, I feel like I got to talk the whole time. No, you do not. The other thing is when people use silence as sort of a threat mechanism, which is they go dark on you, right? They go quiet. Understanding that silence sometimes is a protection tool, but it is also could be a way to control, which is, well, I'm not going to tell Kim what I'm thinking because A, maybe I don't know what I think, or B, I don't like what she's saying and I don't really want to tell her that, so there's a lot of times that there's silence is happening. I think it's perfectly fine to invite the client to say, hey, can you share what you're thinking? Tell me more about what's coming to your mind. And again, those types of questions are non-judgmental. You're not asking for a decision. You're not casting judgment on why are you not talking. You're just saying, hey, tell me what's on your mind. And it opens the door for more conversation and more input from the client.
I like that. Another question, sometimes when you're asking opinions at the engage stage, the client response might be, I don't know, isn't this what I'm paying you for? Mm-hmm. How would you respond to that?
At the engage stage. Let me think about that a minute. Isn't this what I'm paying you for? So the idea being, let me just go back here on this. So, bringing forward a topic of importance. So when you ask the question, what is your perspective on this? Yeah, well, and I think that's perfectly fine to say, no problem, because the client may not have been thinking about it. So you got to remember, clients are people too, especially if they're triggered by status. They don't want to be perceived as not knowing something. They want to be respected. They want to be in the know. And you bring forward this idea and they're like, oh my gosh, I should have been thinking about this myself. So I'm just going to deflect by saying, well, aren't you the expert? Aren't you? That's why I'm paying you. And you say, absolutely, I do have some ideas, but I wanted to know what your thoughts were. And I'd love to know if you want to chew on this a bit and let's have another conversation. Like you give the client permission to start thinking about it. So I wouldn't be put off by them not having thought about it. Just say, it's okay, just an idea. I'd love to know if you want to think about this and talk about this further or not. No harm done, but I just want to bring it forward. And chances are they're going to go write it down going, I should have been thinking about this, right? That's okay. You don't want to embarrass the client. Client wants to be smart, right? So give them permission not to have thought of, say, you're super busy. I know you are, but I thought this might be something worth our consideration.
Like that. All right. This one has a couple of layers to it. This person's asking any recommendations on triple checking comms to maximize strategic thinking before hitting send. And I think like woven into that is, how do you apply these trusted advisor guidelines in a written conversation or document versus, sort of the verbal interchange?
I'm thinking about that, Martin. I'm reading your questions. Any recommendations, triple checking comms to maximize strategic thinking before hitting send? Okay. I'm gonna take a guess, just like you are, Kim. What could this be about? So I think not always are we going to have the great answer, this magical strategic idea. Not always, but yet you're right, Martin. We want to incorporate strategy into our thinking. So it may be more a matter of teaching your team, right? Because not always is a senior level person going to be able to, they shouldn't be seeing every email they send out, but teaching the team to stop and ask themselves a question is, what is the strategy here? What could be bigger impact? And I would do this. This might be an idea, Martin. It's like, if you make a list of questions with the team, say, hey guys, what kind of questions do we want to ask ourselves before we hit send that would ensure that we have added in a layer of strategy into our answer, even if it's something very straightforward? Is there a way that we deliver something straightforward, but then show how it ties to a business objective, or how it is laddering up to what the client has been thinking about for several months, right? How this is going to impact, how this is going to move the needle. So it may be as simple as just connecting the dots to show them, to the client, I'm thinking about this like you are every day, and here's how I see these things connecting. But maybe making a list of questions that the team would say, well, we should stop and ask ourselves this. Maybe it's simple as putting a Post-it note on everybody's computer to say, these are the 3 key objectives that we have to deliver for this client in 2024. Is everything you're doing, to some degree, laddering up to this? And if so, how do we show the client that we are delivering on that promise?
I love that. I think it's so important that everybody on the team understands the big picture, right? We actually had a visual we use like for every client. What's the big picture? Just everybody was right on it.
Yeah.
All right, here is a great question to end on. How do you politely push back against a client when their thought process or idea isn't feasible, tactful, or smart communications perspective?
Oh, what a great question. Okay, I love that one. Oh gosh. Well, this is back to, you're really kind of in the psychology business, right? This is the art. This is the art of client service. This is, you know what? We need to go back to this great slide that gives us a sense of people, right? People, what do people want? Well, they want to feel smart. So here's the thing. So in this particular instance, so somebody brings an idea that really isn't that smart, I would say, hey, Kim, interesting. That's such an interesting idea. Tell me more about how that has come to your mind. Tell me more about what you think that might do to move the needle. So you basically are getting asked, get the client to tell you more. What is the underlying objective they're trying to accomplish? The idea is not so smart, but the objective may be sound, right? So if they say, well, what I'm really trying to do is we're trying to get this new audience to pay attention to us, you say, oh, I love that. That is a great objective. What else could we think about that would help us solve that conundrum, right? That's a complex opportunity for us. You've got an idea. Would it be okay if I got to the team and shared with them some of your thinking, and we came up with some other ideas and we had more of a brainstorm conversation? So in other words, you're not telling the client, this is a terrible idea, but you ask the client, why did you bring me the idea? What is it you're trying to accomplish? Could we consider other options on how to accomplish that? And you know what? not every idea is terrible. There might be a kernel of truth in their idea that is worth building on to say, well, the client, and then you could credit the client. You know, it was your original idea, Kim.
Yep.
You had the original idea. We were able to take it and grow it and really expand upon it, but you were the one. And so then the client, you know, feels very smart. And they're like, my agency loves me. I love working with them. They take great ideas and bring them to life. And I'm the one with you. It, you know, doesn't matter. Remember, if you are the agency advisor, I remember a wise old advisor told me this when I was young in my career. He said, Elise, you are the like the man behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz. You know, you are the one who's whispering in the ear of the client who is at the podium on the stage. You are the advisor. You're not the hero. So
Yep.
anytime you make your client a hero, you win, right? Because they say, I could never have done this without my agency. They know the truth. Don't be afraid to let the client have a great idea. So there might be an artful way. You could say, great concept. What are we trying to accomplish? Let's consider some ways of how we could bring that to life.
Love that. All right. Thank you to everybody who hung with us. That was super valuable. Elise, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Thank you for the amazing leave behind, which hope everybody has downloaded. We'll share this recording, and please let us know if you want to reach out to Elise and have her speak to your agency. She's obviously got incredible expertise, but Elise, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for having me, Kim. It was such an honor.